The election is here, and we know elections have consequences. Social compassion and legislation has a political action committee called Compassion PAC because it is so important to have compassionate elected officials. Today, we are with Janelle Kellman, and we are so excited to support her. And I'd like to ask you, Janelle, tell us about your background and why you're running for lieutenant governor.
Well, I have to say, I am so honored to be supported by you all because your mission and your ethics and your integrity align with my own. For a long time, I was a single cat lady and very proud of it, and always been a lifelong animal lover and grew up with animals. And so near and dear to my heart. And I grew up in the East Coast, but I came out here for law school. I'm an environmental and land use attorney, a small business owner. I'm the former mayor of Sausalito, California, where I'm sitting today. In addition to serving on the city council, I also spent 10 years on the planning commission. And so I really like details and I like understanding how local communities work. And I have a deep, deep understanding of that. But I also run a global climate nonprofit focused on climate risk. We started out looking at flooding and infrastructure. And then, as we asked the question of how do we pay for all of this, we did a deep dive into insurance. And so I became a little bit of an expert around catastrophic risk models, parametric insurance, and how communities can benefit from that as we have new changing climate realities and old risk models. And then that brought me full circle back to California to talk about wildfires. I'm the only candidate in lieutenant governor's race, and I think even the governor's race, that actually has a prime pillar of investing in year-round wildfire prevention. That is something that I believe is number one impacting us across the board from an economic perspective.
Janelle, so you mentioned that as Lieutenant Governor, you would be sitting on the Coastal Commission and Lands Commission. My question is, sitting on those two commissions as Lieutenant Governor, how would you specifically protect animals?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Nick, because I am an environmental land use attorney. I have an undergrad from Yale where I actually focused on history of the American West and the way early settlers viewed the land and its resources. And then I went and got a master's in environmental management from Oxford, and I have a law degree from Stanford, where I actually pursued environmental law and practiced environmental law. So this has long been my passion, and I think I'm the only one in the race, whose experience matches the job. And that's really why I'm running, to your point, Judie, because my experience matches the job so I can step in on day one to do big things to protect our planet, to protect the people of California at the same time. And so I think there are three very concrete ways that the lieutenant governor can help protect animals. And I think a lot of that has to do around land use and habitat decisions. We see this around the world. When we lose habitat, we lose species because animals need this ecosystem. And we have an ecosystem that relies on each other. So you could lose an indicator species, and then it trickles literally down the food chain. And we've seen this throughout the United States and, of course, the world. And so because the lieutenant governor sits on the State Lands Commission, this oversees public lands, waterways, some wetlands, some submerged lands, and habitat, and decisions about leases, restoration, infrastructure, and coastal development that could directly affect wildlife. And that's the lens that I know I could bring to the table. As I mentioned, I have a nonprofit. I work both in the US and internationally. I work very close with the United Nations and the UN Ocean Conference on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We work primarily around oceans and coastal resilience, but you cannot separate your coastline from your inland habitat and your ecosystems. We saw that with the Maui fires, right? The Maui fires actually happened because we came in and we put rectangles and we cut off hydrologic connectivity and habitat connectivity. And that's something that I think, as a member of the state lands, I can actually have an eye to and make sure that we implement. The second is through the Coastal Commission. Our coastline is not just scenery. It is one of the most important ecosystems in the world. From coastal development to runoff to habitat fragmentation, sea level rise planning, marine protection, these all have direct consequences for birds, marine mammals, fish, and coastal species. And we need somebody in this role who can connect the dots. And I'll give you an example. I'm a big fan of kelp. We have 5% of our historic kelp left along the California coastline. Kelp is an incredible nature-based solution. You can sequester carbon through the giant leafy greens of the kelp. They also provide a food source for phytoplankton and others, and they're a natural wave attenuation mechanism. And so this habitat goes hand in hand with the species that it protects and that feed off of it. And when we lose that, we see a trickle effect down the food chain again. And then the last way that I think the lieutenant governor can and should help animals is through education and the workforce. If we want better wildlife protection, better shelter systems, better habitat restoration, and more humane climate adaptation, we need trained people. So lieutenant governor's role on the UC, the CSU, and the community college boards can help build career pathways in veterinary care, animal sheltering, habitat restoration, marine science, wildfire resilience, climate adaptation. It's really a bridge. This role is really a bridge between policy and implementation, and making sure animal welfare is not an afterthought, but a part of how California plans around land and water and economic development. Maybe you smelled the Simi fire yesterday. And of course, that area has a lot of livestock and animals in the vicinity. And so I did a quick video on Instagram and urging people as they had their evacuation plan to think about their animals. Go check the shelters and include that in your go bag. I have a go bag of cat food. My cats are picky, but you need to make sure you have that for your animals as well. And so, I understand emergency response from being a mayor, working with FEMA and Cal OES. AB 478 requires cities and counties, when updating emergency plans, to include procedures for rescuing pets from evacuation areas. And that's the type of legislation I can and will get behind.
Janelle, your work in the private sector has focused on coastal resilience. Tell us what actions you'd like to take as Lieutenant Governor to protect marine life in California's coastal waters. I live in Laguna Beach, and so our coastal health is very important to us here.
When you work with the UN and you focus on the Sustainable Development Goals, it's the decade of oceans, you see how many opportunities there are. And so it can be very exciting, but then you bring it back and you realize how many headwinds you have to bring it into legislation, to make it policy, which is why I'm so excited about this cross-cutting commissions and committees I'd sit on, from the Ocean Protection Council, OPC, to coastal commissions to state lands. So, coastal resilience is one of the primary reasons I am running, and it's about protecting ecosystems, communities, and the future of our coastline. So I would say I would focus on several priorities. I mentioned one of these already. The first is protecting and restoring wetlands. It could be eelgrass beds, kelp forests, dunes, and living shorelines, because they're not just climate infrastructure, they're not just nature-based solutions for flooding, but they're also habitat. And they protect communities while also supporting fish and birds and marine mammals. So I think we need to focus on some restoration projects, which we're already doing up and down the state. The second, and this is a big one, especially up here in Northern California, is to focus on how we plan for sea level rise. I think too often we treat coastal adaptation as an engineering exercise, and I think it has to be an ecological and hydrological one. And we can't just focus on armoring and what's called gray infrastructure. We have to advance either gray-green infrastructure or nature-based solutions whenever possible. And in fact, one of the things I'm proudest of, when I was the mayor here in Sausalito, is we've had flooding here for years. And when we had fires in Sonoma, I thought, well, what happens if we have a fire here, but our evacuation routes flood? And so I got very focused on sea level rise, which was the genesis of my nonprofit. And I personally went up to the state and I lobbied for a shoreline vulnerability assessment and coastal adaptation plan. And I got $1 million from the state to do that work here in Sausalito. So I know how to bring dollars into communities. I know why they're important. The third is about pollution. I think we really need to focus on reducing polluted runoff into coastal waters. Yes. I mean, not a month goes by when you don't see some level of sewage contamination or a broken pipe, and that has lasting impact. I don't think I told you this, Judie. I was on the board of San Francisco Baykeeper back in, 2006, when the Costco Busan hit the Bay Bridge and spilled 53,000 gallons of bunker fuel, like nastiest, dirtiest stuff. And my job was to talk to the press and to help clean up the birds. And to this day, it breaks my heart to think about that work, because trying to take bunker fuel off of any living creature is nearly impossible. And we're still seeing the impacts of that. So pollution is a big one for me. Also, right in line with that, supporting marine protected areas and having better enforcement. And that means funding monitoring and science and enforcement of our marine protected areas, especially as the Trump administration tries to open them up to fishing and maybe worse, like drilling. And then finally, this is where I get to connect the dots. I would use the Lieutenant Governor's platform to connect coastal protection to the blue economy. And that means making sure that we have opportunities to do things like raise kelp and have aquaculture and create jobs and protect the coastline and make sure that we're doing it together in coordination and helping under-resourced communities who live in close proximity to these port areas. So if we connect the dots, we can do a lot through the role of Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned pollution and runoff. Judie and I had worked with a local group of scientists in Laguna Beach around some technology that would really clean up disposed water and water coming out of the water
Runoff, yeah.
management facilities. And what we learned in that process was that there really are not many standards for the water that's let loose into our oceans. And the technology is there to make it really clean, but there's no incentive for the water management districts to really push that technology because there's not a lot of hard standards to make them do it. So
And the testing is lacking, they're not testing for PFAS and all of these. And so, yeah, cleaning up runoff, getting communities to stop using these horrible pesticides and herbicides. So that's something that I've been working on through the Laguna Beach Environmental Sustainability Committee when I was on it, and through my nonprofit.
Yeah, runoff matters. Water quality matters. I don't think I mentioned I worked at EPA Region 9, which is federal EPA up here in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I primarily focus on endangered species and water quality for tribes, because making sure that everybody has clean drinking water is both a human and an animal right, and it is one that is often neglected. Many communities don't have clean drinking water, and if you can't drink it, don't necessarily want to give it to your pets either. And so I think we have to focus on some of that. I see them as sort of kitchen table issues. We should all be able to have clean drinking water.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a minimum standard.
Yep.
Well, in closing, what else would you like voters who care about animals and the environment to know about?
Yeah, I think so much about habitat and habitat loss. And once you lose it, you can't come back from it, because even if you want to protect a certain species, they have nowhere to live. You have a struggle ultimately. And so, I want them to know that I see animal welfare as connected to the largest systems that I have spent my entire career working on, which is land use, climate risk, coastal protection, disaster planning, and government accountability. And I think that animals, we have to take care of them because they can't speak for themselves, and they suffer when we fail to plan, right? They suffer in wildfires, they suffer when habitats are destroyed, they suffer when shelters are under-resourced, and they suffer when climate change accelerates. And I'm not someone who believes animal welfare is a side issue. It's a measure, I think, of our values in practice. Are we building a compassionate, functional, forward-looking California? And my style is practical. So I want to bring broad coalitions of stakeholders together to move real policy and look at change, and not just be writing policy papers that sit on a shelf. And I think that California should lead. We should lead on humane treatment, habitat protection, disaster preparedness for animals, and a more sustainable, healthier food system.
Well, thank you. And
It's so easy when we talk about it. Yeah.
We want to work with you on all those things. So thank you so much for being with us and, speaking to our supporters and everyone that cares about animals and our environment and ecosystems here in California. And we wish you the best, and we want to see you in the top 2 for Lieutenant Governor on June 5th. Thank you.
June 2nd.
June 2nd.
The primary is June 2nd. Quick plug, it is called an open primary. So we have many people in the race. top two go through, regardless of party. And so if you lean towards the right and you have not voted for a Democrat in a while, I am your Democrat and you can vote for me. And so it is the top two that go through, and then we have a general election. If you have a mail-in ballot, you can actually drop in a ballot box today. You can put it in the US mail, no postage necessary, or you can bring it to your polling site on June 2nd.
Okay, everybody vote for Janelle Kellman, Lieutenant Governor, on June 2nd or before then.
Or before.
Send
Or before.
in your ballots right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wish you could spend it. Can I before you finish off here, I really just want you to see what happens in this household. First of all, my assistant has fallen down on the job. But you may also see that we received the package yesterday, and this one has decided it is her place to live. And so there's two boys and a girl, and the little girl is in charge. So if the boys
I have the same cat tree.
Oh, in the back. Oh yeah, they're great. They're great. I'll say one last thing. So, Eckhart Tolle wrote a book, The Power of Now, and he has a chapter on happiness, and he says, I have known several Zen masters in my life, all of them cats.
I love that. We'll close on that note.